Welcome back, conference delegates. I hope all of you had a wonderful lunch and ready for the afternoon session, which will have more captivating presentation. This session will be deliberated on the sub-theme of low carbon building. As I mentioned before the break, we will be putting up questions related to the conference in the afternoon session. 5 copies of book entitled Banda Mesra by Yen Gill will be yours if you participate to answer the question related to the conference. There will be 5 questions. The first to answer correctly will be eligible to receive a copy. The question will be posted after the way forward session, and the successful winner will be announced before the end of WCSC today. The next presentation will be entitled High Density Green Building. Is this the solution for urban areas? By architect Serena Hijaz from Hijaz Architect and Planners. Serena Hijaz is one of the creative directors at Hijaz Architect and Planners and is known for changing the building landscape of architecture through buildings that are responsive, energy conscious, and bold. Her formative years exposed her to energy efficiency and sustainable design, and have culminated in projects like the Harriet Ward University Green Campus, Salcombe Tower Interconnective Offices, and Epic Waste Training Center. Through a series of energy award buildings, the approach to design is holistic, responsive, of placemaking and context, with a view in generating new environmental sustainable specific strategies in every project. Serena Hijaz is the chairman of Green Building Index Accreditation Panel and vice president of Malaysia Green Building Council in hopes to bring awareness to flatten the current carbon trajectory. Please welcome architect Serena Hijaz.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I just want to see everyone can see the screen, okay?
Yes.
All right. I was given this title, so it was as a little bit of a homework for me, I guess, to think about whether high density green buildings is really the solution for urban areas. And why I say that is because when we started 10 years ago about green buildings, the trajectory was, the landscape in Kuala Lumpur was everybody was building 30-story towers, mainly offices. And in the last 10 years, we've seen an increase and development of housing that has also reached these kind of heights. And I think that we really need to relook the way we build. And I hope that when I take you through this talk, you'll be able to see and question some of the aspirations that we have had all these years. I think climate change is already here. And energy, resources, and ecology are the most important aspects to balance towards a net zero. I think we've been hearing a lot about net zero targets of 2030 and towards a carbon neutral environment. And this is because we need to shift our thinking with beyond green. We need to move faster to transition to a new norm where minimum of 50% reduction of energy and water and waste is normal. I say, why is this normal? Because Telecom Malaysia, which is 45 stories high, built more than 10 years ago, already was 50% reduction of energy. So we haven't moved enough beyond that. And that move needs to consider the increase of ecology and biodiversity, at the very least, to reduce the incoming impact that is already here. So at the time when we were doing Telecom Malaysia, we were already talking about heat island effect. And we were talking about temperatures, and we were talking about shading. We were talking about how much the environment would actually affect our space. We have already reached a 1.5 degree temperature changes in the urban areas. And from satellite images that we see here, for example, in Penang, it's already reading these changes, and especially more acute probably in more urban densities than anywhere else. So densification really relates to temperature rise also, because we are increasing the amount of heat island around buildings. And we can actually map out the temperature difference of towers and buildings without greenery, without softening of green space, by at least 5 degrees. That's an incredible amount. So in low-rise developments where there's a bit more greenery around it, we might reach 24 degrees. But as we reach higher and taller, harder surfaces and building materials that we are using, the temperature rise is significant. And that's just in terms of the micro temperature. Densities are seen to be causing a growing reduction of urban greenery and ecology. Think City did a whole study from, rising from Kuala Lumpur to JB to to Penang, and mapped the differences that have occurred in the last 15 years. And there's a direct correlation that, of course, as we get more dense, we also get warmer, and we lack the urban greenery and ecology. So the impact of urban inequality really softens this heat island effect. And it's no surprise, whilst Malaysia has an ecological footprint that is smaller than Singapore by half, Kuala Lumpur itself has only about 9.5% of green spaces in totality in the city. Which is low. And when you consider, when you go and you fly into Melbourne, or you go to Melbourne, or you go to London, and you say they are basically above the 17%, about 20, you immediately feel you're going into a garden city. And maybe that's why we had the aspiration in Putrajaya that it would become a garden city for us. So how do we reverse this? How do we change this? And I believe that we have to really consider later on what I say is how we make. Singapore alone with its energy will have basically a consumption to cool down will increase to 33 gigawatts per year within the next 50 years. So we're seeing this correlation where we're actually having to use more energy to cool down our spaces, and that will also impact in terms of space. So we're coming from the urban environment down to the buildings itself. And we are consuming more and more, and therefore we are also providing more emissions out. The consumption of materials, our emissions from embodied energy to operational energy, water and waste starts to increase. And for now, we start to talk about carbon and embodied energy and operational energy. When we started doing the pavilion for Malaysia at Expo, it was the first time that we discussed the idea of embodied energy and operational energy. And this is an interesting thing, and it's a little bit abstract for the person on the street, because how do they fathom what embodied energy is? And we all know what operational energy is, and that's from our electricity bill, our water bill, the amount of waste that we send out. We can measure that, but we don't realize what is embodied energy. So we need to rethink and change how we make. I think that no one really has looked at or re-looked about the technology that we're applying right now. We've been on this trajectory of basically increasing and increasing, because it's based on a technology of efficiency, which was developed in the war. And so it was nothing short of what we are now considering to be a more nature-based technology design, because the technology we are implementing now was designed in war, and now we have to design for peace. I'm just giving you a little example here. The building on the left, if you're an architecture student, you'll know, is Falling Waters by Frank Lloyd Wright. This is a seminal piece of work. It's set in the greenery, it's built with concrete, and its total built up area is probably about 600 meters square. So if we were going to build 3 times the size, which what normal houses are being built now in Malaysia, a built up area of about 1,790 meters square, the embodied energy to build that house may look like this. approximately 1,291 tons of CO2 equivalent. And the operational energy, which is the energy after we've done energy efficiency, put in some lights, energy efficient lights, cut down in terms of water harvesting, may look at about 61 tons of CO2e. So what does that tell you? Embodied energy and how we construct our building actually takes the bulk of it. Now, this is just a house. This is not a high-rise building. This is not a shopping center. And the amount of trees that we need to sequester just to bring that down to zero is about 26,000 trees. And this is the calculation in the conversion from a tropical tree basis in terms of tons of CO2 tree per year. There's always been this discussion about, well, why don't we just do sequestration or something like that? Why don't we sort of transfer the amount of energy that we're doing here into another place? It's not viable. As you can plainly see here, we would need so many hectares for just one small building, much less something that is much, much larger. So the approach in terms of densification and green, I think, has to be that we look at creating cooler buildings and cooler environments. Something that Singapore is actually studying is called cooling. I didn't know that till yesterday, but because within the Malaysian Green Building Council, we've been talking quite strongly about creating cooler buildings and cool environment, which is really about being beyond green buildings. Cooler buildings means a lot more passive design. Energy efficiency is there definitely in terms of building facade. Water efficiency and harvesting should be normal now. The indoor environmental quality of creating something that is for health and well-being, but our choice of material and surfaces should turn to something that is more nature-based solution. We should be looking about how we build, what we build, and rethinking about adaptive reuse for all the empty buildings that we have out there. And this is the only way that we can actually look at reducing embodied energy by looking at greener construction of material. We in Malaysia actually have a patent for eco-concrete, cutting down the amount of concrete that is about 30 to 70%. It is just as hard or harder. It's actually developed in University Science Malaysia up in Penang. And, but we're not adopting that. We're not adopting it because obviously there's always this thing about it being more expensive and we can't afford to do it. The question here is we can't afford to not do it. In terms of the cooler environment, of course, we're looking, if we look at the much bigger picture, we should be looking at energy system switch. At the moment, we are still using quite a lot of coal as compared to Singapore, which is using more natural gas, which is cleaner energy. And we can't replace solar panels for high-rise towers. The ratio in when you build high-rise towers or when you build solar panels is you need a surface area on top of the roof that is basically a quarter the size of the footprint of your floor areas. So it's quite obvious that if we build something that's 30 stories and put solar panels right on the top, we will never be able to provide enough energy for those towers. And hence why it is basically a multiple approach in terms of how we design. So what we've also not looked at, and which will be an emerging idea, an emerging technology, is low carbon alternatives like carbon capture. So I wanted to bring an example where I think the problem of densification has really hit hard. And I think that probably Wuha's presentation later will highlight that even more. This is a study we did about an urban canopy neighborhood. It's really looking at, could we do densification differently? And where is it affecting most? It's really affecting most in terms of affordable housing. And where people in affordable housing can't really afford to live in high-rise buildings. because the amount of energy, the amount of distance from the ground is incredibly hard for affordable housing. And yet you will see later basically that our growing population needs to move into these kind of higher density. So lowering our energy and resources and increasing college adoption in the greening of environment becomes a lot more critical in this. We took this study. We haven't really built affordable housing. It's something that we are very interested to look at. And these buildings were in the 70s, probably more at the beginning of my time than it is your time. But interesting enough, the typology that you see on the left hasn't really changed in the new housing that we're having here now in Kuala Lumpur. So affordable housing and densification issue for me is a very big issue, that no matter how much green building you do, it's not really enough. So our urban housing typologies have, as you can see around the middle ring roads of Kuala Lumpur, is that we are building these massive car parking below, some reaching 6 or 8 stories. And then we have these towers that are rising above that. There are also other types of typologies where we actually separate if we've got a bit more land and we put the cars next to us. So transportation, our lack of public transportation and our increased number of parking has really put a different slant in terms of our housing. It's put cars before housing. And as you can see on the right here, this is a different way of looking where experimented in Singapore, where, you know, if we built all the tall towers and put it on its side, we could possibly bring it down a bit lower to the ground, where affordable housing really needs to be for the people. So we did a study in Penang, and we saw that, you know, we started first at 78 units per acre, 14 stories high, still kind of livable. We're almost still close to the ground. Maybe at the time we thought those were really high rise, but that isn't really high rise now. We slowly increased that to 96 units per acre, 34 stories, 148 units per acre and becoming more dense at 32 stories. Then moving and shifting up to 173 at 43 stories, and shifting even higher to 48 stories at 190 units per acre. And finally now, I think in Penang itself, we've arrived at 223 units per acre and 49 stories. This is incredibly high for the type of housing and affordable housing for people. And over 29 public schemes, 340 public developments, a total of, you know, more than 73,000 units, occupation for, affordable housing for 400, almost 400 people. I don't think that this is really a livable solution. So, and so whilst we've seen also adoption of green buildings to some of these schemes, we haven't really seen what I would call really greening in terms of the development. So when we did a study, we thought it's really important that affordable housing is closer to the ground. It's really important that we introduce neighborhood pockets vertically. It's really important that we look at community and nature-based spaces like markets integrated with bike parking, not car parking. And that really for affordable housing, we should be encouraging public transportation, perhaps looking at biking. It might even be electric parking for bikes instead of just bicycles. But we should be considering these integrated with the type of housing. Shaded streets, marketplaces, and creating a tropical responsive roof. And in this scheme, we were able to demonstrate basically that we could arrive at what we call a comfortable density at a comfortable height, providing housing and with a greener plot ratio that allowed for future proofing in terms of where we're moving towards, and really look about how we're making our housing. Integrating urban farming, which is important, I think, for affordable housing. Integrating some renewable energy, though we may never be able to provide fully. Rainwater harvesting, social neighborhoods and pockets. Somebody once said that in high-rise residentials, affordable housing, the people can't afford air conditioning. I think there was a study that actually showed that the amount of air conditioning units stuck outside the building and the amount of antennas for Astro really said that they did prioritize certain things over in terms of cooling their space. So this showed an idea that we could actually move a little bit beyond just densification and integrate things that become more community and nature-based. So this scheme, which probably was motivated or inspired by Moshti Safdie's Habitat 67, I think it's a piece of seminal work that most architects kind of know of. They like this idea of pixelation of buildings, different sizes of pockets, different places. It was one of its first to do IBS, but it was a failure when it completed. Now it's no longer a failure. It's actually seen as one of the best locations to live. But one thing is that we have to adapt to a tropical environment. If we were to build a pyramid structure, we would get a lot more heat gain to all the units and the habitats living in there. So we had decided then, how could we make it tropical, responsive to our climate, people, and natural environment? We could turn it upside down and create a much more bigger umbrella canopy roof, which allowed us basically to provide the urban farming on top, to provide solar panels on top for renewable energy, to give us shaded streets underneath and replace where marketplaces were in terms of internal courtyards and places that would become more friendly. And as you can see, the building is actually slanted on 15 degrees in order for us not to get direct heat gain, but to basically respond in a passive manner how housing could actually be. And this building considered at many different levels, enhanced thermal comfort, self-shading, energy efficiency, centralized chill water systems, rainwater harvesting, efficient water fittings, and really turn our heads around in terms of how we make and build. There's no way we're going to change climate change, but we can change the way we make and live in our buildings. So this was the example of the building. It really just rises up to 11 or 12 stories. It gives us different pixelations of housing units. It considers the indoor and outdoor environmental spaces and provides a much more livable city and densification. So I just wanted to end this because I did this, the ecological footprint. I don't know if many of you have done that, where you've actually entered WWF and did your own ecological footprint. Mine is at 4.1. It means I need four Earths basically in the amount of consumption I'm doing. And that's because I'm not vegetarian, and eating meat basically consumes a lot in terms of carbon. I travel by car 3 times a week to work and back in this pandemic. I'm going to take my first flight across to Dubai, and that's meant that my footprint is running at 4. Malaysia's footprint is running at 2.6 and 3.9 in terms of biocapacity and ecological footprint. I show this image because it tells you how much it will take to reverse what we are doing. This picture is essentially the amount of greenhouse gas effects, CFCs and fluorocarbons on our in our sky and the ozone layer. In 1987, we banned CFCs and fluorocarbons. And yet it will take more than 40, 50, 60 years for us to basically reduce that ozone layer and recover. And that's the amount of carbon that we have also emitted above. So we really need to change drastically how we built. And I hope that everybody would probably reconsider, including developers. And if we get forward in terms of how we do that now, we will find that we will be much easier for us and just as beneficial economically as well as to the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Architect Serina Hijaz, for the informative and interesting presentation. The next presentation, entitled Form Follow System by Richard Hassel, co-founding director of WOHA.
Hello.
Richard Hassel is the co-founding director of WOHA. He graduated from the University of Western Australia in 1989 and was awarded a Master of Architecture degree from RMIT University Melbourne in 2002. He has lectured at many universities and is an adjunct professor at the University of Western Australia. WOHA was founded by Wong Mun Sam and Richard Hassel in 1994. The Singapore-based practice researches and innovates new architectural and urban solutions to tackle the problems of the 21st century. Hassel is the director in charge of several ongoing local and international projects. In Australia, he is currently working on the 443 Queen Street high-rise condominium in Brisbane, Forbes Residence condominium in Perth, and together with Liminal Studio, the Hepburn, a creative industries and performing arts development in Hobart, Tasmania, completed in 2020. The practice has won a number of architectural awards such as 2019 Urban Habitat and Best Mixed-Use Building Awards from the Council of Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat, and 2018 World Building of the Year for Kampong Admiralty, and 2018 Best Tall Building Worldwide for the Old Asia Hotel Downtown. Please welcome Richard Sam.
Thank you. Let me see if I can get my talk up. Hang on. Okay. Are you getting that full screen?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Hi, everybody. Thanks for welcoming me to the talk. And yeah, as mentioned, I'm doing a presentation called Form Follows Systems, which I will relate to the topic of the low carbon society. But basically, Form Follow Systems is an evolution of our practice philosophy. We think it's really important to think of our buildings as components of big global systems, because only then, in the context of systems, can we think about what our buildings should be doing and how they actually contribute to the overall effect. So first, I just wanted to share some books that's been quite influential in the way we've been thinking. And I think all of them are kind of have a similarity in that there's sort of big picture views of things, which I guess in itself is the kind of systems way of looking at things. The Sapiens is I'm sure many of you read it, but really interesting in terms of giving this sort of really distant viewpoint to humankind in history and the characteristics of being human. Next one, the panning instinct is something quite interesting, and actually this author has just published a new book called The Web of Meaning, and both books are really interesting in that they basically look at a history of the meaning of life. And I think no matter what we're doing in the end, that's the really big question, that we need to have a firm idea of what we're doing on our daily basis. Like what meaning does it have, and is it worth doing, and is it moving us in the right direction? So this is very interesting. It goes all the way from tribal cultures through the great civilizations of the world, through Hindu, Buddhist, Islam, Christianity, and then Enlightenment, and many different views, and just saying which ones of these have useful concepts for us going forward in terms of a sustainable way of living, and which of them have maybe ones that are, make it difficult for us to reach a sustainable view of life. This book is something that even when I was at university was considered old-fashioned, but I think it's coming back again because Christopher Alexander did think in terms of systems. For him, there was a lot about more representational systems and very domestic systems. I think if we apply this philosophy to some of our bigger urban issues, some interesting things emerge. So we've been looking at Christopher Alexander again. Another book about scale, which I think is also really interesting because as architects, we're always dealing with a particular level of scale. And even when you move up to master planning or zoom in scale to something like interiors or product design, you get very different viewpoints. So this book sort of points out how zooming in and out of scale can give you different viewpoints or let you draw new conclusions. And I think it's really important for us to do that too in terms of thinking about how our architectural interventions in the world are affecting things at different scale. This one, Triumph of the City, I think is interesting. It just has a lot of data on why cities are in many ways possibly the engines of our solutions as well as causing a lot of the problems. But it's something that makes you feel a bit better as an architect about being involved in urbanism and development, in that probably as we're searching for this answer to a more sustainable future, that cities are probably definitely part of the solution. They're not just the problem. Donut economics is really good too, I think, in that it did something that I think everyone who's not an economist wondered why economists didn't factor in things like real world limits. But at last there's been a revolution in economics and people are starting to think how you deal with the real world situation of limits. And so it basically just situates economics within the constraints of the physical world that we live in on planet Earth. And I think it's important to read this because I think as architects, we're always talking to various people in politics and public policy and government. And so I think you need the tools and the language to be able to situate architectural development within the economy as a whole and where the economy should be going. Because there's a lot of old-fashioned thinking in every sphere of knowledge. And I think it's good to be abreast of where things are developing to build a total intellectual system for where your buildings should sit. This book I thought was fantastic, The Good Ancestor. So it takes a quote from Jonas Salk, who developed the polio vaccine at the beginning of last century, but said, are we being good ancestors? And it totally transforms the way you think about what you're doing in life. If you imagine 5 generations before you and 5 generations ahead of you, and say, would they look back at me and say I was a good ancestor? So I think it's a really, it fleshes out the concept, but it's a really simple tool to think about, am I stealing from future generations? Am I destroying future generations' world? And then what would they think of me? Ecopuncture is a book written by Nirmal Krishnani in US, in Singapore, but a very good survey of projects that are in various ways doing interesting things in architecture and urbanism in terms of sustainability. So for overall and very so well-researched and comparative evaluation of many projects, I think real world projects who have managed to get it built in the current situation, it's a really good reference book to have. And final one is The Systems View of Life. So Fritjof Capra, who is the author, has written books for the last 50 years around this concept, but this is really his sort of resolved, and I would say in a way almost like final book on this. But it's really 20th century and rational scientific thinking. For many decades or centuries really has been pulling things apart, you know, so we tend to separate things and analyze them and refine them and make them more and more studied and known and expert in parts, but there's danger in doing that. So we need to look at how the parts interact with the whole. And I think all the problems that we're having in the modern world are problems with systems and the whole, and the contributions of small things to bigger movements. So this book is a really great book for putting it all in context and helping you think about systems and the power of systems, and also the risk of destabilizing systems. And I had a little quote here, sorry, it's a lot of text to put up on a screen, but I think it's sort of crucial to this thinking. So a study of matter begins with the question, what's it made of? Leads to notions of fundamental elements, building blocks, measuring and quantifying. And study of form asks, what is the pattern? And this leads to notions of order, organization, and relationships. So instead of quantity, it involves quality. Instead of measuring, it involves mapping. So these two very different lines of investigation have been in competition with each other throughout our scientific and philosophical traditions. For most of the time, study of matter, of quantities and constituents has dominated. But every now and then, the study of form, of patterns and relationships comes to the fore. It's also worth noting ancient Chinese philosophy and science were always more concerned with the interrelations between things than with their reduction to a fundamental substance. So in the words of distinguished sinologist Joseph Needham, while European philosophy tended to find reality in substance, Chinese philosophy tended to find it in relation. And I think this is, as designers, it probably appeals to us. As someone living in Asia for a long time, I guess it also helps me make a lot of sense of the things I see around me in Singapore. But I think in many ways, as designers, we're always looking at the relationship between things. You know, when you say that the detailing is beautiful, it's because there's a relationship between the detailing and the overall concept. And I think things like ecosystems are more about the relationship, about different elements within the forest than so much about cutting up and studying the frog itself. And so I think it's a good mindset to get into as well. So we've been trying to think of this architecture of relations, that we're looking at ourselves as more of a conductor of beneficial systems. How does what we do change the outcome of a system to make it better by maybe just small tweaks or changes in it, rather than an architecture of substance? So I think as substance, you might just be really focused on you know, is it concrete or is it glass? Is it this or is it that? But they're not really so much thinking about the relationships of things and about creating beneficial outcomes to bigger systems than the project itself. So we've been slowly evolving this concept, and we keep making new publications every few years as we develop it. So our last one was Garden City Megacity, which is quite old now, about 6 or 7 years ago. So we're working on a new book at the moment about form follows systems, but in many ways it's a follow-on to the concepts that we developed in this book. So as Serena's pointing out in the previous talk, buildings account for a huge amount of CO2, and a lot of that is in the embodied energy of building them, but also in their use. And so cities are really a major part of the problem that we have to solve. So now in the book, we went through various ways or patterns, if you like. So if you remember Christopher Alexander in the books, the pattern language. So these are all patterns that can be used to improve the performance of buildings from an energy and carbon point of view. But today, I think, since it's involving, I think, quite a few civil servants, we thought it's important to talk about some of these ratios, which we think are useful tools to create a lower carbon society. So green plot ratio, I think, is something that everyone in Malaysia is quite familiar with. We've been interested really for a long time in not just sustainability from an ecological or energy point of view, but also from a human cultural point of view. So we think community plot ratio is something really important to measure at the same time. On me. Civic generosity, so this is at a sort of bigger level from community, but at a city point of view, how generous your building is. Does it encourage and facilitate public life? And ecosystem contribution. So how, once you've made green spaces, how productive can you make them, and how can they actually encourage a functioning ecosystem? And finally, self-sufficiency index. So no matter what your Green Star or LEED rating is, in terms of absolute self-sufficiency, your own energy, food and water, how well does the building do? So I'll just quickly go through a few projects which do well in each of these categories to show you what that might look like. So Oasia Downtown is our star as far as green plot ratio. So we managed to achieve 1,100% with this building. And the way we do that is we dedicate a lot of the surfaces to greenery. So both horizontal surfaces and vertical surfaces. So you can see the entire facade. We really saw it as a host for greenery. It's actually a very affordable facade. It's just expanded powder-coated aluminium mesh. But we just set it out from the facade and created space behind it for planter boxes. At the same time, we put the cores of the building in the corners rather than in the center. And that allowed us to open up these very large volumes for social and green space in the middle of the building. Next one is community plot ratio. And so we're going to share with you Skyville, which is a public housing project in Singapore. So Serena was mentioning the, I think it was 48 stories it got to in Penang. So this one is 47, almost the same, and has how many units is it? 960 apartments in it. But the way we dealt with the idea of community and breaking down the scale and making it livable here was to think about sociability as the sort of the heart of the diagram. And we did that by saying every home should be part of a village, and the village should be around 80 homes. So people get to know their neighbors, would share a common space. So in the end, we ended up with 12 villages of 80 homes rather than one building of 960 homes. And each village has a sky garden that it looks down into. And everybody, as they go from the lift to their apartment, will pass through this space and have an opportunity to engage with their neighbours. At the same time, at the ground level, there's community spaces where other people in the neighbourhood can come and join in. So we sort of built this layers of different sociability from between neighbour to neighbour in a village to the development and the surrounding towers and neighbourhood at the ground level and also at the roof. And so all the moves were designed to enhance sociability. So whereas in a normal HDB in Singapore, this would just be a void deck, here we designed it as the community living room. And we even set up the furniture to feel a little bit like lounge chairs and side tables and coffee tables to encourage people to sit around and mingle. So it's basically we just dropped 2 floors of units and created a double story volume on one half of each building. So we basically lost 8 units, you could say. It would have been 11 floors times 8, and we ended up with half of it losing a double floor, so that gets us to 80 units. And then within this space, we could add some height for the planting, so we raised the level up. And so you end up with about a 1.5 volume space for the social spaces. And this image is really the key to how it works. So this is when you've just come out of the lift. Your apartment is connected on the left and the right by a sky walkway, and you look down into this area. So if your neighbour is down there walking their dog or doing some homework at one of the tables, you have an opportunity to make eye contact, to call out hello, or just to wave. It's a very simple idea, but it actually works very well and completely transforms the relationship you have to your neighbours in a high-rise building. And then the rooftop is another fully public space, so anyone can come here and look at the view. So the next concept of civic generosity, I think, is a way for buildings to be good citizens and to see themselves as, again, contributing to a system. So if you think of public space as a system that runs through the city, if every building contributes to the public space in a generous way, you'll have a really beautiful and generous city. If every building walls itself off from the city or just takes from the city but doesn't give back to it, you end up with quite a hostile city. And so the first aspect of generosity was basically, we thought it would be nice to match the generosity of Hong Lim Park, which was a park donated by a private citizen to Singapore in the late 1800s. And so named after the benefactor. And so we thought the building could try and match his generosity by also creating the same amount of greenery in the building. We also thought it's really nice if, as you walk through the building, you in a way get the same experience as the hotel guests. So it's a building that says, we care a lot about the quality of space and environment, and we're sheltering you as you walk past, and come and enjoy the gardens and the water, even if you're just walking the city footpaths. Then it has very open and airy public spaces. And so again, it's sort of volumetrically sharing wind and light and air that go right through the building to the neighbours behind. And so even to the public housing blocks behind, it offers a sort of vertical park as a view for them. And this vertical park is also the circulation for the guests going to their rooms. So the next rating system we think is important to measure is ecosystem contribution. And this building we're showing is, or it's more than one building, is a government project to house many different agencies which help people with different abilities. And so here was really a chance to develop a very rich ecosystem as a garden. And so it's saying this development is not only friendly to all different kinds of human beings, but also friendly to all different kinds of plants and animals as well. So it started as it's a renovation project to an old technical college. So it was mainly car parks and paving and some buildings from the 1960s to the 1980s. So quite a plain building. And we worked with salad dressing, our landscape consultants, on this to consciously make it into a very vibrant and diverse ecosystem. And it was also done as a way that it was not only serving the needs of the client, but also serving the needs of the surrounding neighborhood to have a neighborhood park. So anyone can wander in here, which also performs a kind of soft communication of the ideas behind it, which is that people with different abilities can still function very well in society if design makes a friendly environment for them. And so it's interesting when you design for biodiversity. So in terms of just like there's a lot of plants that attract birds and insects and fruit for other animals, that it's very fast for all the animals to come in. And so some surveys that we've done have shown that it's really has a lot of biodiversity and increasing all the time. So sometimes just simple adding the objective to your design objectives that you want to design for biodiversity can have a very big outcome for really no difference in the budget. So the last one, the self-sufficient city, was a project we did to study, can we do an area that's fully self-sufficient in food, energy and water? So if you remember Serena's footprint diagram, this would shrink the footprint of the district to its own area. And this is something that we've started to run as a masterclass at NUS School of the Built Environment for 8 years now. So we've been doing it on the Singapore as a whole and seeing whether it's possible, which we're finding it is doable. But again, it's that systems thinking. It's thinking if it is going to be achievable, what does every piece of the city have to do in order to contribute to the overall systems? And so the energy harvesting layer, for instance, as Serena mentioned, has to be bigger than the footprint of the building if you're over about 4 or 5 stories. So in this case, we extended the energy harvesting beyond the edge of the building to almost double the footprint area to harvest energy. We then had residential workplace layer, and the whole thing is designed as a walking city. So there is no need to have a car or to use private transportation. We then have a rainforest that runs right through the city. So we have a very productive ground floor as well in terms of ecological services, environmental services performed by the ecology. And then beneath that, a transportation and service layer, but really mainly relying on autonomous vehicles and logistics delivery and things like that. So it's not really used by human beings down in that level. And so it was done as first as a competition in Singapore. We then did it for a district in Jakarta, but the principles generally would apply in Malaysia as well. So it is possible to be self-sufficient at around about this scale by designing differently from the point of view of designing for low carbon. And so, for instance, the entire rooftop of the city is one connected agricultural layer for growing vegetables. What we're showing here in the foreground is like a community garden, which is a social space, but in the background is using the high-tech vegetable growing, which makes much more efficient use of the space. And the idea was that it may not be a very interesting skyline to have this sort of agricultural skyline, but we thought it was interesting to flip a typical skyline upside down and make a really interesting ground plane at the human level where you're experiencing the city. So it can have all kinds of volumes and interesting spaces as you walk around the city. So the ground plane is only electric ground level trams, bicycles and personal mobility devices. It's very shaded and green and connected. There are no cars at all at the ground. Next one is Kampong Admiralty, which is a building that we designed as we were developing these ratios. So I think it performs very nicely across all of them in terms of green plot ratio, community, civic ecosystem, and self-sufficiency. And it basically took a whole range of uses from medical center to elderly housing and community and rearranged them to create a major public space at ground level and a major park on the roof. And the social housing sits within the park. It has a whole water system that runs through it. So we use the different layers of the garden to filter the rainwater and recirculate it. And we've done post-occupancy biological surveys. So we actually have almost twice as many species in our rooftop garden as there is in a park on the ground level. And these are some of the creatures that we photographed within the gardens. So yeah, it's not an expensive project. It's a HDB budget. It's just painted concrete, precast and prefabricated. The medical center in the middle, which is to attract the elderly to use these services and practice preventative medicine rather than waiting till they're sick to get treatment. And the public space at the ground level. The childcare is next to elderly care, so you have a mix of old people and young people together, and a big communal garden on the roof. So the final one I just wanted to share quickly was, I think often as architects we feel a bit powerless to influence the outcome of government policy or private developers. But this is a really nice project we finished recently in Taichung in Taiwan, which was a great example of people coming together to make change. And so we actually came through the university. So I think it's something where academics can also be very powerful. So the university organized for us to make an exhibition of our projects in Taichung because they specifically wanted to influence government planning policy. So they helped us put up this big exhibition in an old aircraft hangar in the park in the middle of the city, and then organized a whole series of presentations and talks, inviting the city planners in, and to really point out that many of the aspects of these projects were not possible under the current planning guidelines in Taichung. So they started to lobby to change the regulations to enable more green buildings to be built. They then paired us up with a developer, so this Golden Jade, and asked the developer to demonstrate, do a demonstration project, which they thought would be good for business as well as good for the environment. So this is our lecturer on the left, the developer in the middle, and Mansam from Woha on the right. And so they worked with us to launch a project with the university as a kind of consultant. They then launched a project and continued the exhibition and advocacy work in the sales unit. So they basically used this idea of transformation as a sales tool and as demonstrating the thought leadership of the developer, and continued to hold these sort of press conferences and workshops. And then finally, finished the project. During the time of the project, they worked with the city to change the regulations. And so now, I think under the Change City plan, there are over 50 buildings now underway, which involve greenery. So it was a really good example of how in a fairly short time, by people coming together, wanting to affect change, it was possible. And the city of Taichung is now one of the leading cities in Taiwan for greener architecture. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard, for the informative and interesting presentation. We now move forward with the panel discussion. For this, may I invite Yang Berbahagia Datuk Architect Izumi Harzani bin Ismail, the President of Malaysian Institute of Architects, to moderate the session. Over to you, Yang Berbahagia Datuk Architect Izumi Harzani.
Hi, Azira. Thank you very much. It was a very interesting presentation by both Serena and also Richard. Okay, so allow me. Let me greet all the participants here. Okay, Assalamualaikum and good afternoon to everyone. Thanks to all participants for staying with us for this afternoon session. Let me mention my name again. My name is Izumi Harzani. I am the President of Pertubuhan Architect Malaysia, PAM. PAM as the co-organizer of this WCSC conference together with Reda and MIP. I am very much obligated to moderate this session as requested by our hardworking organizing committee. Okay, great. The sub-theme for this panelist discussion is low carbon building. As we all have seen the presentations just now by both architect Serena Hijaz from Hijaz Architect and Planners and Richard Hassel from the co-founding director of WOHA, they have presented to us how building forms and systems play major roles in the carbon society framework. We are glad to have Serena and Richard with us now to answer to your questions. For registered Zoom participants, please write your question in the Q&A box below if you have any question. Okay, let me start the ball rolling. Okay, Serena and Richard. Okay, let me throw the first question to Architect Serena. Serena, are you ready? Okay.
I guess so. I was a precursor to Richard's presentation. I think we sort of segued, and then he showed in much more depth.
Yeah. Okay, but I think both your presentation and Richard's presentation, I think, complement each other. I think it's very interesting discussion about high density development in urban area. So maybe I address the first question before we take the question from the participant. So Serena, the question to you, okay, in high density, the high density development are friendlier to nature in terms of land utilization. But at the same time, it create urban heat islands, like you mentioned just now. So with concentrated carbon emission per area, so it create more emission and then per area. So why the world economies are stay depending on fossil-based energy, will high-density green building be the solution for the urban area? I'm asking the question that you asked. Now I'm asking you back. So the solution, okay, at the present moment.
I'm not a high believer that I guess we have a different groundscape to Singapore. And that is that we have the ability to probably spread out a little bit more. And we have probably more greenery, but we've taken for granted this kind of greenery. I think that where I was coming from is affordable housing as we are building it now in Malaysia isn't anywhere close to the way the development of housing has gone through Singapore. There's really a conscious effort to bring the ground up, to provide more community spaces, to make it more livable, I think. And until we shift our thinking in terms of building this, I really can't see that it's advantageous to us. Although, I mean, I see that Richard has built something that's at the 46 stories. But I think there's been a lot more, and he's correct. We need to empower our government, basically, in terms of the knowledge to bring more green and urban greenery into the city. I think that's the first thing. And until we can shift that idea, because they are the ones that hold the empowerment, we are having a huge battle in terms of urban greenery up the building throughout the environment, and making it more livable. Yeah.
Thank you, Serena. Richard, do you agree with that?
Yes, I mean, of course, Singapore with the land costs, people tend to spend more on buildings here. So I know the budgets in Malaysia, especially for low-cost housing, you know, every dollar is very important. So there's probably also a lot of resistance to the cost of greenery. But we always encourage people to look at especially policymakers from the really big picture point of view. I mean, if you're providing a lot of greenery in the buildings, you don't have to set aside land for a public park, maybe, or not so much land. And so in terms of land use and sprawl and infrastructure, similarly with density of developments, if you create a walking neighborhood and you have public transport, you can save a lot of money and carbon investment in building huge highways and roads and bridges and things which are, you know, they're all part of the carbon footprint of a city. So it can be quite distorting sometimes to look at low-cost buildings which sprawl for kilometers and then require, you know, massive billions of dollars in terms of roads and transport networks and things. So I think that's where, and interestingly, you know, it's really hard to find data on this. You know, in terms of someone's total energy footprint, catching a lift to the 46th floor rather than driving 3 more kilometers to a house further out. I haven't ever seen a sort of comparison of the lift energy carbon versus horizontal transport. So we tend to discount things on the ground and horizontal, I think, and we overprice for things high rise. And I'm looking forward, I think, to a lot more research into how we can make informed decisions on these kind of things. Because at the moment, it's really a bit of a gut feel and a lot of experimentation. And I feel like surely by now we should know some of these answers.
Something I watched yesterday was, you know, the amount of rice we're growing and the emissions that we are releasing is the same as flying.
Oh, I see.
And I found that incredible in that sense. So yeah, but I think the moves that are being made is something that we can learn from Singapore. Really was so excited when Richard said he was going to speak, because there's a lot that we can learn, and by example is always the best way.
I have just now Richard just shared that about the importance of study of form, study of matter, study of pattern in understanding those. And we understand that those is very important in transforming building designs. But transformation of building forms and system also play important roles in achieving SDG 11, that is making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. As architects, it is easy to transform the building design, but to transform the mindset of the project owners or clients is more challenging. So Richard, maybe you can share with us what is your approach in changing their perception to be more receptive towards radical design changes. For example, like what you have shared with us in Oasia downtown, for example.
Well, I think for us, we realized changing minds and mindsets is the difficult part. And it's always too late in a way with a project. You know, once you get awarded a project, you have maybe 6 weeks or something to put forward a proposal. So it's very little time to educate a client in that time and change their mind. So that's why we have been doing this series of publications and exhibitions. And I think trying to share the mindset and the ideas so we can cultivate the soil, you know, before we have to plant the seed. And I think we've had some success in that. Strangely, like not maybe so much in Singapore, but Brisbane, for instance, really studied our book, Garden City Megacity, and recently released a policy paper called Buildings That Breathe, and have changed all the regulations. Istanbul was very interested in the book, even City of Paris. And so I think it's really important to present ideas. And in some ways, the buildings get in the way because people tend to look at the buildings from an idea of style or fashionable. Is it on trend? You know, they don't look at the relationships, as I was saying, they look at the form and the matter. And so I think this discussion about systems and the way things contribute to the big picture is the best way to do it.
Okay, thank you, Richard. We will come back to that topic later. I take the question from the floor. There's one question here. I think this question addressed to Serena. You talk about the concrete, the eco-concrete just now. So there's one question here. Why is it more expensive to adopt the so-called patent eco-concrete? Is it because the premium to be paid to the patent holder? If so, what good does it do except for the patent holder to profit from the invention? How do we tackle the balance of incentive for innovation versus common good for humanity? You want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think it's a very easy one. It's about demand, really. And, you know, when we first started, there was nothing like green paints or low formaldehyde or, you know, to buy sustainable timber is 20% more expensive. I got asked this question, but why is it so much more expensive? I said, well, you know, they have to cultivate it and they have to refarm it up. They have to replant it after that and they have to set it aside. I think that as demand increases, you know, I didn't know we developed this eco-concrete because we were looking for all sorts of materials. Of course, everybody knows about fly ash and putting it inside it, but they're actually, and whether we like it or not, concrete is the easiest, fastest way for us to build. And I think we'll be very naive to think that it could be otherwise. Yes, timber may take over to a certain point, perhaps later. But if we can actually cut down in terms of the amount of concrete and cement and have recycled or upcycled elements into it, it will be so much better for us. The reason why it's expensive is really about demand. if we actually imposed, and here's another radical idea, that you basically have to use energy efficiency, you have to use recycled content in your construction, then it becomes, the demand is there. And as we've seen, that the demand and the cost of paints or low VOCs and everything is equitable to what it was for the normal products that we get. So until we get that demand, will it bring down? It takes a lot of research to do it. It's not so much that there isn't demand for it, for the cost to actually go down.
Yeah, so we can see that the moment the demands are there, then of course the cost of production by volume can
be. The government have just said, okay, we're going to calculate carbon. We're going to introduce carbon tax. Mm-hmm. Now I come then to when you build something, mm-hmm. Are you going to be imposed that carbon tax, and how are you going to relate to that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That in itself may change, because the equitable bit will be carbon tax or reduction of material.
Okay, so let's take another question. Okay, another question. I think this is an open question. Any thought, opinion on installing solar wall panels to support high-rise electricity usage? I think the person who asked question is talking about the solar wall panels, not about the roof, but the wall. So maybe we can start with Richard. Do you want to respond to that?
Sure. I think like anything, it's a matter of where you get the most bang for your buck. So in general, the roof is a cheaper place to put solar panel because you get a lot more reliable access to sunlight. But in a project that was, for instance, had an unobstructed west-facing wall, and maybe that has some other conflicting uses on the roof, it would be a totally great place to put the panels. There's a general problem people don't realize with solar is that once a panel is partially shaded, it's no use at all. Like, it has to be fully in the sun or they stop functioning. So if you get like a moving tree shadow with the wind moving across a wall, you can end up almost disconnecting all your panels, as the shadow moves across them a little bit. So that's the main reason, walls are trickier, because they just tend to interact with the environment around them a lot more than the roof.
Yeah. Will the slanting wall help in this situation?
In the end, it's just how many hours of fairly direct sunlight you can get on the panels. So even on the roof, in the early morning and late afternoon, they don't get a lot of sun either because of the low incident angle. So you only get about 4 to 6 hours of good sunlight on any solar panel if it's a fixed panel. So you can totally get that at horizontal 45 degrees or vertical, just as long as it's nice and unobstructed. That's the main thing.
Serena, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, if you're doing a passive design building, solar verticals are not really going to do anything for you, because you're really trying to get the ventilation through and breathability. So if you're talking about an office building, and maybe I should have approached Celcom Tower with doing that, because it's an enclosed space of work, especially when you go to high-rise working space. It's a little bit more trickier, I think, to handle cross-ventilation in offices. Certainly when we tried to do Telekom Malaysia, 49 stories, we wanted all the gardens to breathe through the core area, and then we were told there's too much dust, it's IT, you can't do this, and all the rest of it. So I think on solar, I still think it's best still on the roof for the efficacy. I have one question for Richard. Out of all your indexes, which would you prioritize when you start a design? Which would you prioritize as the most important, index for you?
Richard, you don't have to worry about that, because after this you can ask the same question to Sarah.
I think it's a more, I sort of see them as a graphic equalizer. And if you look at the brief and the client and the location, there'll be a particular blend of which one makes the most sense for that project.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think it's like anything in design, it's very context related.
Okay. Okay. Before we take more question, I have this question to Serena. Okay. I've seen the scheme that you did in Penang, the conceptual scheme for Penang South Island development that I think Hijaz Architect and Planners has submitted in collaboration with BIG.
Yes, or BIG in yes, we assisted.
You are in collaboration with them. So it is a big vision, okay, of future sustainable city that you see it. Is it as this is how the tropical city is supposed to be designed to be planned in future? Is this how it should be?
You know, reclamation is never an easy thing. I think, you know, Singapore is expanded in reclamation. Nobody talks about it so much, but a lot of islands that are small and with a population that we know is going to be growing to 500,000 in 10 years, you know, how does the city grow? And I guess we try to see that we do it as environmentally as possible. It's a very nature-based solution project. It's got more than 25% greenery. Its orientation of the city is following the wind direction to bring the winds coming through. The building heights are no more than 10 or 14 stories because of the flight path. It's fairly low. It's got a lot of blue-green networks. It's got a lot of regeneration of the waterways and the sea around. So we realize, of course, that the first thing everybody's going to say is, what about the fishing? What about the fishermen? What about their livelihood?
Imagine if this project actually in the middle of desert in Dubai. I'm sure nobody will complain about that.
Right. Yeah.
But do you think, let's say, beside the issues on the reclamation, okay, but do you think this is how the future cities are supposed to be planned? Yeah.
Yes, I mean, we basically did, you know, we planned for autonomous vehicles. We really planned for walkability, shaded walkability. We've planned for more public transport use. So there's a lot of key things that have been put into this master plan. So at a very, you know, big picture, everybody just thinks it's all about reclamation. It's affecting the fishermen. It's a very low flap of water that is coming out from the southern portion, actually, and it goes actually quite far out in this low mud flap. There is, of course, the concerns of what you do. And so at every step, I think that the modern city of tomorrow, or future-proofing, shall I say, this city has been built in terms of a master plan, in terms of the approach to future-proof it. You know, to climate change.
Like you mentioned in your presentation just now that okay, when we design, we have to design for the time we are in peace and design for peace, not design when we are in war. Okay, so what actually make you say that previously cities or building design when we are in crisis or we are in war, but we are in war.
We're building. Industrialization came about from war. You know, everything from our bread making to grains, to our crops, to transportation systems, all the rest of it have basically grown in its efficacy due to industrialization, which was stemmed from when we started making armaments, when we started producing food, there wasn't sufficient food. And so there's GMO and all the rest of it never came to question because we needed to get very efficient in how we did it. But we really have to reverse that. If we start to think about how we're going to build for peace, we will really think quite differently. Our approach will be different. So, you know, we all think about what's the happiness index, country of happiness index that everybody talks about?
Bhutan.
Yeah, and they build according to their culture and their context. We are building according to what is the Western culture and context. If we shift our thinking, with regards to, this adaptation, greenery, this lanai, this kampong concept, whether it's from the ground or the ground above, we will basically build quite differently, and we will be ahead of our time.
Richard, in my view, we are in war now. We are at war. Well, of course, we are not at war against another human, but in this pandemic, we are at war against the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic. How do you see that this actually pushes us to do more efficient design to face this situation?
I think the pandemic is quite useful as a great disruptor. It's everyone's argument about doing things for the last 30 years we've been advocating for change is that it's too hard to change and do things differently. And then the pandemic, in the short space of time, had us all working from home, telecommuting, doing everything differently. When our not our livelihoods, when our lives were at risk. And I think global warming and the climate emergency, our lives are much more at risk. In the end, the pandemic, the death rate is high, but it's still only 2% or something. Like if there's famines or wars or disease or disruption from climate emergency, it's going to be many times worse. So I hope it gives people the impetus to change things faster and to allocate budgets, because I think governments as well suddenly had plenty of money to spend on things because they had to, and I think this situation is just the same. So I think all that's missing is the sense of urgency, unfortunately, because things, when you look out the window, don't seem that different from a climate point of view. But the last couple of years with all the fires and storms and things are starting to make people realize what's happening outside the window is changing. So that's what I'd hope, I think, is that the pandemic is in some ways a practice run at transformation.
Practice run.
Okay,
hard lesson.
I take one more question, okay, from the participant here. I think Serena maybe can answer this. Okay, how many green buildings are there in Malaysia? Where are they located? Are the numbers increasing? What type of buildings are they? Residential or commercial? I think this one they can get from, I think, the GBI publication, the Greening Malaysia. But I invite you, Serena, maybe to explain more, to share more on this.
Well, I mean, it's 10 years that we've been talking about greening Malaysia, but greening, I would say, to everything to do about the efficacy of systems and the building itself. We're up in Green Building Index, probably 600, in Green RE, probably 120, in the government, probably maybe another 100. We're about 700 probably, I would say, total in the whole of East and West Malaysia. Most of them centered in the main city centers. So Kuala Lumpur, Penang, JB, and lesser in the smaller cities or smaller towns. But then the effects of them are probably much less, like Terengganu, Kuantan, or something like that. They are really smaller footprints compared to what we're doing. It hasn't moved fast enough. The reason is it's not mandated. If government basically will stop being concerned about building green and basically made it mandatory, because it really should be mandatory at this point. After 10 years, if it's not mandatory, it's almost like not recognizing that you're going to run out of fuel for your cars. And so what are you going to do about it? You're going to run out of something and you must do something about it. So I think we would get a bigger adoption if it was mandatory, which is what it is in Singapore, even after the same 10 years. I'm sure there's a much bigger take up on that. And the difference also is that they have something called green plot ratio, which Penang is deciding now to sort of have that also for their island. You feel the impact. Nobody knows that it's not the flooding that is affecting most of us. It's actually the heat island. Penang itself is suffering more from heat island than it is from floods.
Okay, just now I think Richard presented a lot of books that it shows that he really reads a lot of books. So, and I think that is a part of the continuous research by Richard. So, looking at Kampong Admiralty project, it is amazing how Wuha has brought a new dimension to high-density urban dwelling using basic forms, but with careful planning of the spaces and by putting greeneries into the building instead of putting the building into the green. The quality of spaces have changed. It may have reduced the heat island effect. So are you going to build more buildings like this, or is this just an experimental project in finding a perfect urban living solution?
I think you're giving us too much agency in terms of like what we choose to do next. We're like any architect, we still have to wait for the right project to come along. But it was a big political success, that project. And so there are quite a few more Kampong Admiralties on the drawing board and under construction already. Not involving us, unfortunately, with the tender process and things that ended up going to others. Yeah, I think once you have a building that's a political success and a popular success, I think that in Singapore at least really drives adoption of it as a kind of prototype or a template, which can then be rolled out en masse. And I do think that that's something really important. If you can build one thing that does something that it sets out to do and show that it can be done on a commercial budget and you sort of without anything going horribly wrong, I think it's very powerful, and then other people will quickly adopt it. So I think change does get led by successful prototypes. I do think that is something that the Institute and government can really take a role in. If these could be developed as sort of projects and funding applied to, and they can be done. When Singapore did the first zero energy building, it was a government funded one, but it made a huge transformation in mindset. So I think it is, yeah, it's possible to affect change through a single project if it's done with clarity, but it's always luck too. I mean, with Kampong Admiralty, we had a fantastic client who really helped push the ideas through for us, and probably if he hadn't been there, it would not have turned out like it did.
Must have loved Pickering and basically said, I want something that's going to, be like Pickering sort of thing.
And he was on the healthcare side, so it was more from a hospital and wellness point of view.
Health and well-being.
Yeah.
But I think what you've managed to do, Richard, is, we have Ken Young, obviously, with ecological design and all the rest of it. But the way that you've managed to present the projects, which seems very simple and easy to construct, is that you've humanized the ecology. You've humanized those aspects. So rather than it being purely a conceptual at a high level, you've humanized it. And
Thank you, Serena. Actually, I'm looking at this question. Okay, this question actually very much related to what you are saying. Before you go further, let me read this question.
Okay, sorry.
Which is very relevant when you mention about humanize. Okay, so this question, okay, from the participant: overpopulation and increased consumption due to general prosperity. Is this the one that no? Yes, correct. Overpopulation and increased consumption due to general prosperity is the real issue behind. As we are looking to an aging population at this rate, in the future, there will be less people on Earth in the general, I assume. Would the discourse we have for now, assuming increase in population, be irrelevant in the near future? Less population, less human, less carbon. Okay.
You want to answer that one?
But I think population is the elephant in the room that that politicians in particular have real difficulty dealing with. But I think we're on trend. I've got to try and remember all the futurist things I've been reading and seeing. But I think the current maximum population is already baked in, I think, into Earth and the people being born today. But it is predicted, I think, about 2070 is like maximum population, and then it's decreasing from then onwards. So if education of women continues, so basically the number of children is usually directly correlated to the proportion of women who receive an education in the country.
Right.
So I think we are on trend. The problem is, like, from 2070, the peak, and for those people to die of old age, I think we're well into the 2100s. And by that time, many of the trends in terms of destructive climatic trends will have already occurred. And so that's why I think there's an urgency to solve it now. We can't wait for for the baby boomers to die and say the problem is done, because there's still a whole lot of people coming online, which will be continuing the trend for about another 80 years, I think.
Okay.
Nick and Seke just put up a report that we are basically not producing as much as before. But as you rightly said, we've been in this pandemic, but we're over 417 parts per million in CO2, and it's still rising. Since the talks that I've been given for the past 10 years, every year it's still rising, even through this pandemic. And the reason is that we are actually getting the effects. And to reduce these effects is going to take years. Is why I put the last slide in. It will take us 20 years to reduce the effects of what we've already created, and even if we cut back on the population. So instead of spending so much money going to Mars, I would be pumping that money into burgers that are made out of veggie instead of meat. So food resource, into material resource, because we're cutting down everything to build. We're cutting our mountains to build our buildings. I'll be looking at that kind of technology and spending money there.
Okay, I think we don't have much time anymore. I probably exceeded the time given, but I think I want to ask one more question. Okay, one more question. Because I think Richard mentioned that how actually the joint exhibition with the university in China managed to influence the government. So to both of you, Serena and Richard, what is your advice to policymakers and local authorities regarding their immediate action required in allowing architects to explore possible solutions in line with the principle of sustainable development and ensuring that the development needs of all groups within the society are met, and to achieve high level of energy efficiency in building design? So maybe you have 2 minutes each or 1 minute each. Okay, start with Richard.
I would suggest what I mentioned earlier. I think is like funding futuristic design problems. I think not too close, because I think too close you end up being too beaten down by people saying you can't change this, you can't change that. So maybe 20 to 30 years in the future, give yourself a carbon target for a district or something, and just say, okay, let's do a design for that time, assuming trends in technology and things are there. And then when we can figure that out, we know where we're heading. So it gives you a direction in terms of policy. So you say, okay, actually 30 years is not that long. Actually, it's maybe 6 project cycles or something will get you to the 30 years. But gives you a very clear target and an understanding of what needs to change. And very, very cheap. I think like to do a design investigation might be $100,000 or something, compared to these other budgets and things that are spent, it's nothing very much.
Okay.
But it will be well worthwhile.
Serena? What's your advice to our local authority or to government?
I think that the local authorities must, if they recognize that this is the way forward, first of all, they have to recognize this is the only way forward. And then they will be able to find the solutions that will back them up. And the most, I think, most concern on the ground is it's just going to cost too much more. There's no return on the investment. And really, if we can put the cost aside, because the cost can be recouped within, the 2 or 3 years of investment that you put in. But I found that the first comes with recognizing that we need to address this from a government level. And once they've recognized that, say for Penang, for example, they recognize that they need to do all these things, improve the lives of Penangites. And so if we're going to do development, what would that be? How can that be? I think that's really a big motivation. Yeah.
Thank you, Serena. So, okay, thank you very much, both of you, Serena and Richard, for taking up the question from the participant and also sharing your inspiring views on how the future cities can be designed in achieving low carbon societies and to have more livable cities. To all participants, thank you for joining this session. We hope you have learned and enjoyed this presentation, and I hope to see you all again next time. So this concludes this session, and I hand over this back to Azira. Back to you, Azira. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dato'. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now post up the quiz in the chat box. First, please do state your name, organization, email, and phone number. Please answer all 5 questions in the Q&A box. We will announce the winner after the Way Forward session, which will be announced by the President of Malaysian Institute of Planners. WCSC Secretariat will contact the winner and arrange for the delivery of the book. This is all the 5 questions. So the questions are, first, when do KL target to achieve carbon neutral status? The second question, what are the 6 GHG emitting sectors? Question 3, what are the 4 elements of low carbon cities framework? Question 4, name one of the holistic perspective on sustainable urban mobility. And the last question is, can you name one of the theme of Soft City? The first to answer correctly will be eligible to receive a copy of the book entitled Bandar Mesra by Yan Gale. Participants can start answer the 5 questions now. May I repeat the question? All right, so moving on, may I now cordially invite Yang Berbahagia Datin Town Planner Haja Nuraida Saludin, the President of Malaysian Institute of Planners, to wrap up the WCSC 2021. Please welcome Yang Berbahagia Datin. Over to you, Datin.
Thank you, Azira. Thank you, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to this final session of the WCSC 2021. And thank you for staying back till the end. I see on the line there are about 400 people still online. If it's in physical, probably half the hall would have been going home, because of traffic and all that. But because we are all sitting at the comfort of our chairs with coffee in our hands, so it's wonderful and marvelous to see 400 over people are still online. So I do hope that you will stay till the end of my session. I'm given about 30 to 40 minutes, and I'm happy to announce the winner of this impromptu quiz that the organizers have come to do with us today. So the 12 editions of the WCSC this year focus on the theme of low carbon society from blueprint to implementation. And the theme is actually upon the request of Mayor of Kuala Lumpur, Datuk Seri Town Planner Mahadi Ngah himself, as the BKL embark on the implementation of their low carbon society blueprint, where Kuala Lumpur aspire to reduce the city's carbon emission intensity of GDP by 70% by 2030. So KL have about 8 more years to go to implement this aspiration so that we could get, perhaps in 2030, we could measure and do the same conference, WCSC conference in 2030 to see where we are now in 2030. So with that in mind, the hardworking committee, WCSC 2021 committee, led by Mr. Lee Hanrik, with the supports from the angels and the superheroes at the committee, from MIP, Reda, and Pam, putting together the wonderful speakers that we have had over yesterday and today for the first online edition of WCSC. We have addressed various issues pertaining to low carbon cities, sustainable urban development, urban mobility, urban environment, greenery, and climate change. From the 3 themes, urban mobility, urban environment theme, low carbon theme, the knowledge shared by all the speakers, the engaging conversation that we have had over the 2 days, albeit it's online, has been engaging and very, very eye-opening. And the speakers sharing their real life projects, showing us that it's doable at other places. And why not in Malaysia? Why not in KL? So what have we learned and what are the way forward, not just for Kuala Lumpur, but also for the rest of the other cities in Malaysia particularly. Next slide, please. So low carbon cities, these are some of the lessons learned that we know that low carbon cities are made up of, there are different terms on different aspects. First, the society itself. That we need to look at the society, including it's not just about planning the urban built environment, but also planning it together with the society in mind, with the user in mind at the end. Like many of the speakers have said, with a human scale, human behavior in mind. So, and then that leads to how do we then work on low carbon economy, the economic activities that can reduce the amount of carbon emission emitted from production. And then this is what we have been discussing for the last 2 days, for today and yesterday, the design of the cities, the arrangement, design of building that promote low carbon lifestyle and economy. And we talk about urban mobility, urban greenery, and today in the last session today, which was quite engaging and interesting from architect Serena Hijaz and Mr. Richard Hansel, really talking about the building design and how do we change the typology of buildings so that we could prepare an environment where low carbon lifestyle can happen and at the end achieve the aspiration for low carbon society. So basically in Malaysia, I think we have learned from right from the beginning from Datuk Seri Zaini Ujang, Datuk Seri Mahadi yesterday at the keynote, that in Malaysia, transportation and also in many other cities in the world, transportation is key to carbon emission. It's the largest contributor together with energy, and 73% is from road transport. So in the first session, where Mr. Esben Meander Christensen and Ms. Carly Gilbert Patrick, in the urban mobilities segment of WCSC, we spoke a lot about the different mode of transportation, active mobility, pedestrian, walking, cycling, and what would make what would be the design or the factor that would make that really work in Malaysia and also in other cities. So there's a lot of real life example given by the speakers when we spoke about urban mobility. So today, this morning, we also spoke about urban environment, greenery, where Dr. Aisa Tobing and Mr. Andy Ball presented to us what are the example and key success factor, what are the critical element to contribute towards urban environment and urban greenery. And basically, there are 6 largest GHG emitting factors that we've learned over from yesterday: transport, energy from electricity, waste, industry, land use change, and agriculture. And if we look at in the context of where we are today, especially on transport, on energy usage, on waste generation, on land use change, these are the things that really everybody in this conference, urban planner, town planner, architects, landscape architects, developers, we all have a role to play and to shift our practice so that we could also contribute and help cities in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur especially, to achieve the aspiration moving towards low carbon cities. So if you look at transport specifically, for example, we are talking about shifting mode of transport and looking at the first mile and last mile solution, making it really easy for people to shift their lifestyle. So, and how do we then do that and encourage? And there's been a lot of lessons learned from yesterday's paper. And in terms of energy, we spoke a lot about the green technology. We spoke about green building and retrofitting existing building and design of building that traditionally that's common in Malaysia. Today, what's interesting is architect Serena showed us that the typology of the different modern buildings in terms of the high-rise buildings, where commonly that we see in everywhere in Malaysia, for example, we see stacks of building stack, floor stack above each other. But the two speakers in today's session, in this afternoon session, are proposing and mooting for the change in building typology. So I hope in high-rise building that we have with us today is that we could change and not see parking stacked above each other in the high-rise building, but perhaps a different view can be seen in terms of maybe parking can be as basement. So there is a lot of shift that needs to be done, not just in the way that we influence the urban setting, but also in the way that we do things, in the way that we develop things. We talk about also circular economy. I think Dr. Aisa Tobing spoke about circular economy, and in fact, with from all the speakers, we learned that what's really important is research, data, and evidence. And moving forward, I think what can be learned from the 2 days at WCSC is that sustainability and in fact low carbon is not an option anymore. It is everyone's responsibility. And to achieve that, we need to have blueprints. We need to have action plans, which a lot of cities in KL, in Malaysia, for example, have already come out with blueprints, have already have their action plans. And however, these blueprints, these action plans need to be done holistically. They also need to be able to be flexible or dynamic enough so that we can make room for the inevitable or unimaginable circumstances such as the pandemic that we are in today. And the actions that we are going to be implementing needs to be based on concrete data and implementation. And this needs research, needs a lot of study and data collections, and so that its decisions are made on evidence. And if we need to change midway, there's always that data that is used to back that changes. So which to me, right, we've got to start, as a, for example, even as a consultant, I don't do a lot of, we don't do a lot of data mining. So in the digital world, there's now a lot of opportunities and platform for us to really do a lot of data mining. And we need to have, I think what we have learned in the from yesterday and today, that we need to have organizations, leadership that are willing to really go for it, and to willing to keep the momentum, and also have the belief to implement. And I think also key to the 2 days learning is we really need to plan and look into trying to bring scale closer to ground. In a sense that look at the in context of human scale, at the street level scale, not so much concern about, I think David Sims and the speaker, I think Mr. Even Espen have shown us that scale is important, human scale is important, and that's the basic. It's no longer about the tallest tower. It's no longer about a high rise, but what's more important is what is planned at the street level, what is planned at the first floor level, what is planned at the human scale level, because that's what makes up the life of the city. And that's what is really important, because that's the notion of creating street level activities, placemaking, and a lot of time to just plan with the human life, the people in context. So we need, and also from the 2 days, what we have learned is that we now need to look at density differently. It's no longer about the plot ratio or floor area ratio that we are used to it, but it's now the words or the notion of community plot ratio, green plot ratio, ecosystem contribution, civic contribution. And I remember earlier in the last session, somebody was talking about Bhutan, where they don't measure their performance based on GDP anymore, but what they measure is on gross happiness index. So it's really about the people. It's really about measuring differently and looking at the different parameters if we want to really move forward with addressing climate change, addressing low and ensuring low carbon cities are implementable in Malaysia. And I think that being said, also there's a lot of this 3-speed scale, really look at into the small scale items, looking at, for example, A lot of example is to repurpose our existing building, looking at mitigation measures that is site specific, that is context specific, and also the ability for us to reassess activities progressively, periodically, and continuously. So I think those are the some of the key points that we've learned from the 2 days WCSC. And what I would like to also say that what's important is we really need to put life at the center of the attention in the planning moving towards low carbon cities. And that is coming back in order to by planning with the human scale in mind, in context of what we are doing, and developing based on that. So those are some of the key items or key lessons learned from the 2 days that we have been listening to all the speakers here at WCSC. So before I hand over the session to Azira, I would like to announce and to report also that this year's WCSC, we have there were 1,000 participants registered online throughout the 2 days. It's attended by 524 participants. That's a good number for WCSC. And in the 5 sessions, we've brought to you 10 speakers. And besides the Zoom platform that we have here today, we also have we also broadcast the session live with YouTube, Facebook, and a total of 520 minutes live duration with over 1,000 viewers. And at Facebook, about 649 viewers. So that's quite an amazing feat for the first ever WCSC online that is being done. So that is the performance of this year WCSC. So I hope that next year we could have a better performance. Whether be it online or physical. Okay, so moving on, I think it's time to announce the winner of the quiz that was done earlier. So I think it's been informed that we will choose 5. There will be 5 winners, and the winners will receive the book of Banda Mesra, translated version of the Jan Gell book, Cities for People. And the winners are, there's no drum. And the winners are Hazrin Hussein from University Malaya, Lim Kay Yong from, we don't know where he is from, but the organizer is asking for you to leave your contact number in the chat. Tan Lai Wei from University Tun Hussein On, and Ansem Das Matalamutu from Tuanku Abdul Rahman College, Kuala Lumpur, and Mr. Abu Lais from Sandabi. And Mr. Abu Lais, please leave your contact number in the chat. So congratulations to all the winners, and you will be receiving the book. And please leave your contact details in the chat so that the secretariat can deliver the books to you. To end this last session, I would just like to bring out 4 key ingredients as a recap from WCSC that to implement the low carbon city, moving from blueprint to implementation, we need champions and leadership. So it's nice to see that DBKL is championing this, and I hope that the leadership in Kuala Lumpur will continue to push for low carbon city and low carbon society in KL. And it's great to hear in the budget yesterday that the government has also announced that Malaysia is pushing for carbon neutral by 2050. Yep. And secondly is we need policies and we need to put budget allocation for implementation. Most time we have all the policies, but most time also budget constraints is the stumbling block. So we need to really look at the right allocation on the infrastructure, spending the right infrastructure to advance the low carbon cities agenda. And this is the third one. This is very important also, and this is core to it. That I think is listening to the citizen, people on the ground is really important. So we need to listen to the voices on the ground. And last but not least, research and data, evidence-based planning and decision making. So, and to say, lastly, let's just do it. And before I close, I just want to say the quote from Paul McCartney: there must be a better way to make the things that we want, a way that doesn't spoil the sky or the rain or the land. And with that, I would like to thank all the participants, all the speakers, the Mayor of Kuala Lumpur, and everyone at DBKL, University Malaya, and the crew behind the scene, all the sponsors, and the wonderful, hardworking WCSC 2021 organizing committee for making this year's WCSC happen. And I would like to think it's a success, and we hope to see you next year at WCSC 2022. Till then, take care, stay safe, and let's pray that WCSC 2022 we can meet in person. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh. Selamat petang. Have a good day. Have a good rest of your day. And don't forget to smile, as today has been a wonderful, wonderful day for me. And I hope for you too. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, Yang Berbahagia Datin. Ladies and gentlemen, we have finally arrived at the end of World Class Sustainable Cities WCSC Conference 2021. I would like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for attending this conference. Slide presentation will be shared at our website www.wcsckl.com starting next week, or you can also contact our secretariat at MIP, REDA, or PAM. We hope to see you next year at WCSC 2022, inshallah. Please take care, stay safe, see you all again in the near future. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.